The night air inside the abandoned storage shed felt still enough to press against the lungs. Dust drifted in thin strands, suspended like old breath waiting for someone to disturb it. A faint beam of early winter light slipped through a cracked wooden plank, settling on the cold concrete floor where a faded chalk outline remained, etched into silence, into memory, into something that never really left this place. For 50 years, this shed had held its breath, guarding the truth beneath layers of neglect. Now, as the investigator stepped inside, the past stirred, slow and reluctant, as if waking from a long, uneasy sleep. The case had been recorded as one of Washington's quiet tragedies. A young woman found lifeless on a late November night in 1972. Her name had been Marielle Rane, 26 years old, originally from a small coastal town near Gig Harbor. The newspapers from that year described her as thoughtful, introverted, and steady in her work at a local printing press. Colleagues remembered her soft way of speaking, her habit of keeping a journal in the lunchroom, her reluctance to discuss anything personal. It was said she walked home every evening along Cypress Road, a routine so predictable it bordered on ritual. On the night she vanished, Marielle had left work at 7:42 p.m. The police file recorded this time with a precise, almost obsessive certainty. She was seen passing the corner bakery, then the bus stop, where a witness claimed she stood for a moment before continuing down the dim street. Her body was discovered inside this very shed the next morning by a groundskeeper who entered to store equipment. No signs of struggle, no clear motive, no footprints that matched anyone known. No suspects who stayed suspects long enough to matter. The investigation stalled quickly, and by late 1973, the case drifted into the archives, becoming one more unsolved entry among many. Now 50 years later, the investigator Samuel Rourke, a man known for his restraint and meticulous quiet, stood where Marielle had taken her last breath. He removed his gloves slowly, as if afraid to disturb the air. The shed had been closed for decades, untouched except for the occasional intrusion of rain through the roof. A faint scent of damp timber clung to the walls. In one corner, a rusted rake leaned helplessly against a broken wheelbarrow. Nothing here looked capable of holding answers, yet everything felt stained with a question left to rot. Samuel traced the chalk line with his eyes. It was barely visible after so many years, almost erased by time, yet the outline still held the shape of a life paused mid-story. He crouched down, touching the floor gently, as if acknowledging a presence. The silence inside the shed carried weight, a quiet made of history rather than emptiness. His breath clouded faintly in the chill. The case had returned to him like an echo he couldn't ignore, a call from the archives department, a hint of something new. But standing here, faced with the remnants of a long-forgotten night, Samuel felt the familiar tug of guilt. Not his guilt, yet a collective kind, the kind shared by every investigator who ever closed a folder too soon. He closed his eyes briefly. A memory flickered. The first time he read the file as a rookie, thinking he'd return to it someday. That day had arrived with the quiet inevitability of a delayed storm. He rose slowly, brushing dust from his hand. The shed felt colder now, as though the years between then and now were thinning. Something waited beneath the silence, something small, something overlooked, something ready to surface. The case was open again. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. The phone call had come 3 days earlier, late in the afternoon when the office was at its quietest. The archives clerk, voice tentative, mentioned finding an unlogged envelope inside a mislabeled box from 1974. No return name, no date, just a thin parcel sealed and forgotten. Inside was a single photograph, grainy but intact, showing the storage shed as it appeared the morning Marielle was found. But in this photo, There was something the original case files never documented. Something at the edge of the frame. A shadow, or more precisely, a figure moving away from the shed, blurred but unmistakably human. The envelope also contained a short, handwritten note. "Look closer, you missed it." No signature, no explanation, no matched handwriting in the system. Samuel had studied the photo under multiple lights, magnifying it with slow, deliberate care. The figure appeared partially turned, as though startled by the camera. Only half a profile showed, indistinct, obscured by grain, but carrying a posture suggesting motion, urgency, or both. How had this gone unlogged? Why had someone kept it hidden for decades, and why send it now? He went back to the archives, searching through layers of dust and forgotten labels. The box it came from had originally contained unrelated files, minor thefts, abandoned vehicles, petty disputes. Nothing close to a homicide. The envelope must have been slipped in long after the box was packed away. Someone had wanted it hidden until the right moment, or until their conscience demanded otherwise. Now Samuel stood at his desk, the photo placed gently beside the reopened file. The old documents were yellowed, their corners fragile. He leafed through them one by one, matching angles, timestamps, statements. Not a single mention of another person near the shed that morning. Not a single witness claiming to see movement. He returned to the photo, tracing the figure's outline with his eyes. It wasn't fear he felt, but a slow, persistent tightening in his chest, recognition that this clue had always been waiting. The kind of detail that slips through when an investigation is young and overwhelmed. The shadows on the shed matched the early morning light from that season. The figure's position aligned with the groundskeeper's claimed time of arrival, 6:13 a.m. He had always insisted he saw no one. Yet here was someone captured at 6:12 based on light estimation. A minute before discovery. A minute before history shifted. Samuel lifted the photo closer. The figure's left shoulder carried something small, perhaps an object, perhaps a satchel. It was impossible to tell. But the direction they moved suggested they knew the groundskeeper would arrive soon. Someone leaving the scene unseen. He placed the photo back on the desk. The implications rearranged themselves with slow certainty. The case had not simply been mishandled, it had been interrupted. He reopened the investigation officially the next morning, filing it under historical review. The department approved with cautious interest. Old cases rarely revived without cause. This photo, unnamed, unexplained, was cause enough. Back in the present, Samuel organized the evidence methodically. The original photos, the statements from 1972, the final report, and Marielle's personal belongings. Her journal remained the most delicate piece. The last entry was dated 3 days before her death, a brief note written with steady handwriting. "Something feels different on Cypress Road. I can't explain it." He read it again, absorbing the subtle tension behind the words. Not fear, not certainty, just a shift in routine, a disturbance she could sense but not name. The new clue, paired with this journal entry, created a direction the original investigators never pursued. Someone had walked near that shed before dawn. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who might have followed Marielle during her routine walk days before. The case wasn't just reopened. It had awakened. 3 investigator examines, past reports to identify overlooked details. Samuel returned to the shed later that evening, armed with the old reports and a portable lamp. He set the lamp down on the floor, letting its warm glow spill across the interior like a quiet confession. The shadows deepened in the corners, giving the space a muted kind of dimension. He spread the documents out carefully, each page weighted by a small metal clip. The air smelled of dust and faint earth. The cold made the paper edges curl slightly. He started with the earliest statements. The groundskeeper, Elias Ward, had been 61 at the time. His handwriting was steady, his recollection straightforward. He claimed he arrived at the shed as usual, intending to collect tools for the morning's maintenance. Nothing unusual about his routine. Nothing unusual about the shed, until he saw a shape on the floor. But something subtle in his statement caught Samuel's attention. Elias mentioned hearing a faint sound when he approached. A rustle or soft step, he had written, though he dismissed it as probably a bird, maybe wind. Samuel lifted his gaze toward the shed's cracked wall. The opening was narrow, barely large enough for a stray leaf to enter. Yet the sound Elias heard had been enough to register in his mind. A footstep, perhaps, someone leaving. The next report was from a passerby who had seen Marielle earlier that evening. She noted nothing unusual, just Marielle walking with her shoulders slightly hunched, hands in the pockets of her coat. A calm figure, alone, steady. Then came the printing press manager's interview. He described Marielle as reliable, quiet, often staying a few minutes after her shift to organize her station. But his final sentence lingered with quiet weight. She mentioned someone asking for directions the day before, said the person seemed lost. Lost or pretending. The detail had never been followed up. Samuel continued reading, allowing the patterns to surface. The statements formed a map of small, nearly invisible gaps, moments the original investigators dismissed as coincidence. A figure near the shed, a rustle with no source, a stranger asking questions, a journal entry hinting at unease. He gathered the pages, aligning them with slow precision. Something connected them all, a thread woven so thin it had faded the first time around. He stood, stepping toward the far wall where the light from the portable lamp met the darker edges of the shed. The floor held subtle markings, dents, scrapes, signs of age. But near the back corner, where the wood paneling met the concrete, he saw something faintly different. A narrow groove, shallow but deliberate. He knelt, brushing dust aside. The groove extended a few inches, almost hidden beneath years of debris. It formed an angle, then another, too precise to be accidental. A symbol. A mark left behind by equipment. Or something placed intentionally. He leaned closer, tracing it gently with a gloved finger. The groove was old, very old, but the pattern suggested purpose, as if someone had rested an object there, leaving a subtle outline that survived the decades. He checked the old photos included in the file. None captured that corner clearly. The camera angle from 1972 focused primarily on the body, the entrance, and the immediate surroundings. The back corner fell into shadow in every image. Whoever stood there had remained unseen. He rose, staring at the corner for a long moment. The silence of the shed seemed to deepen around him, absorbing thought, carrying it back into the layers of history embedded in the walls. He returned to the desk of documents, turning to Marielle's belongings. Her small notebook still intact, her house key attached to a simple metal ring, a thin scarf folded in an evidence bag, nothing outwardly unusual. But inside the notebook, beyond the entries, a page near the back contained a small sketch, barely more than a shape, a triangle nested inside a square. Beneath it, a single line. Seen this twice now. The groove in the shed's corner mirrored that shape almost exactly. Samuel exhaled slowly, the weight of discovery settling into place with a kind of quiet finality. Details overlooked, patterns ignored, a symbol repeated, a presence near the shed that morning. The past had not been silent. It had been speaking all along. The investigation widened the moment Samuel compared the symbol in Marielle's notebook with the faint outline in the shed's corner. The match was too precise to overlook. It suggested someone familiar, someone she crossed paths with, not merely by chance, but through a repeated pattern. The symbol became a quiet doorway into the past, guiding Samuel toward names long buried in the case file. 3 individuals stood out immediately, not through direct accusation, but through subtle details ignored across decades. Each had once hovered around Marielle's routine life, their roles small enough to fade from early suspicion, yet large enough to re-enter now, 50 years later, like silhouettes returning to a scene they never fully left. The first was Victor Hale, a coworker from the printing press. His file noted an affinity for quiet corners and late-night shifts. Back in 1972, he was in his early 30s, a man described as observant to a fault, often seen watching the workroom more than participating. He'd been interviewed once, his comments short and carefully measured. He claimed he barely knew Marielle, offering a brief nod and a faint smile when asked about her. He denied speaking to her outside work. Yet in the archives, a small slip of paper, overlooked, wedged between 2 unrelated sheets, listed his name beside a note. Often near Cypress Road, late evenings. No follow-up questions, no cross-checks. His alibi for the night of her passing was thin, walking near the waterfront, alone, with no witnesses. The early investigators had considered him unimportant, but Samuel placed him back into the orbit. The second individual was Helen Stroud, the bakery owner near the bus stop where Marielle was last seen. She had provided a statement describing Marielle's calm temperament, her frequent purchases, her polite nods. Helen's interview contained no suspicion, no irregularity. She'd been dismissed as a bystander with no connection beyond proximity. Yet another note from the notebook revealed something unexpected. She asked if I needed help walking home, twice. Odd timing. Why would a bakery owner close her shop, step into the dim street, and offer unsolicited company? Concern, routine kindness, or something deeper, an interest in Marielle's habits. Helen had been in her mid-40s at the time, described as cautious, perceptive, and often aware of neighborhood shifts. Her alibi came through several regular customers who remembered her closing the shop early that evening. Reliable witnesses, yet memories blurred when filtered through decades. The third person stood apart from the rest. Daniel Rudd, a maintenance supply driver, delivered items to the printing press every Tuesday and Thursday. His presence wasn't unusual, but his final recorded interaction with Marielle held a faint ripple of unease. According to the manager, Daniel had asked whether Marielle walked home alone. He said it casually, as if in conversation, but Marielle had later mentioned feeling watched from across the street. Daniel's alibi was firm on paper. He reportedly left town for a family visit that night. But the file contained no verification beyond his own statement. No ticket stubs, no witness, no corroboration. His file faded into the background after 1972, untouched, unchallenged. Samuel placed the photos of the 3 suspects across the shed floor, anchoring each with a paperweight. The portable lamp cast soft shadows across their faces. None appeared overtly threatening. None fit a clear motive. Yet each hovered near the edges of Marielle's life in subtle, almost forgettable ways. The kind of presence that evades suspicion by blending into routine. He examined their past interviews again, reading slowly, allowing each sentence to linger. Victor spoke in clipped phrases, revealing nothing personal. Helen's statements were warm but carefully structured, as if measured for intention. Daniel's words came across as casual, but hints of hesitation lingered in the margins where his handwriting dipped. Each carried something quiet, something restrained. Not guilt, nothing that obvious, but tension that had escaped attention before. Samuel placed the old photograph, the one from the envelope, near the three profiles. The blurred figure at the frame's edge seemed almost to lean away from recognition. Gender indistinct, clothing neutral, but the posture suggested someone who knew the shed well enough to approach or leave without hesitation. Any of the three could fit that shape. Any of them might have been wandering near Cypress Road early in the morning, concealed by darkness and routine. The investigation had shifted from silence to possibility. 5 clues emerged slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. Samuel continued reviewing the layered history with patient precision. He noted the details others had skimmed past, the small changes in tone, the moments that hinted at private tension. Each clue emerged not in bursts, but in slow, steady fragments, like faint reflections surfacing as dust settled. The first clue came from Victor Hale. In the archives, a forgotten box contained his old work reports. Most were bland, procedural, yet one page carried a faint smudge shaped like the same geometric symbol found in the shed in Marielle's notebook. A triangle inside a square, drawn lightly, as if absent-mindedly or with intention hidden behind routine. Victor's report didn't mention the symbol. It appeared almost by accident, but Samuel recognized patterns disguised as mistakes. Why did Victor draw it? Did he know its meaning? Or had he crossed paths with someone who shared that symbol? The second clue came from Helen. Samuel visited the old bakery building, now vacant and lined with dust. Outside the shop, a narrow alley led toward a small storage area behind the structure. The door was padlocked, but the metal carried faint scratches. Not recent, old, layered, nearly forgotten. Inside, through a small window, he saw remnants of stacked wooden crates. A faint outline of a triangle etched into one of them. Was this an old marking system from shipments? Or did it echo the symbol found twice in connection with Marielle? He checked city records. The bakery had received occasional deliveries from the same supply company that Daniel once drove for. The connection felt distant, yet the symbol's repetition refused to fade. The third clue emerged from Daniel. His file contained routine deliveries, signed receipts, and mileage sheets. But one page, dated the week of Marielle's death, held a sudden irregularity. A visit to a maintenance facility near Cypress Road that wasn't listed on any formal routes. His handwritten note simply read, "Extra stop, returning equipment." Yet no one at the facility recalled equipment being returned. In fact, records indicated nothing due that week. The extra stop placed him within walking distance of the shed. Samuel placed the clues beside each other in a careful row. 3 individuals, 3 traces of a symbol, 3 paths converging around Marielle, each unaware of the other's presence, or perhaps unspoken about it. It wasn't proof, not yet, but the clues hinted at a web of quiet interactions, small movements that went unnoticed not because they were invisible, but because they blended into the texture of daily life. Samuel returned to the notebook entry. Seen this twice now. Twice, not once, not countless times, twice. Her world had been orderly. Patterns mattered to her. The symbol's repetition wasn't random. It caught her attention because it appeared where it shouldn't. At work. Near the bakery. On Cypress Road. The question lingered like a breath withheld. Samuel stepped back from the documents, letting the shed's cold air settle around him. The space felt tighter now, as if the past were folding inward. He walked toward the back corner again, the one with the faint etched symbol. Kneeling, he studied it under the lamp's glow. The mark sat low to the floor, suggesting something had been placed against the wall, leaving that shape behind over time. A box. A crate. A tool chest. He scanned the old photos once more. One picture, long overlooked, showed a small wooden crate near the shed's entrance, partially hidden by the angle of the camera. Nothing about it seemed meaningful then. Now, the crate's design caught Samuel's attention, a faint square pattern on its side. He went to the archives again, searching for records of storage equipment used in the early 1970s. After hours of methodical work, he found a catalog showing supply crates used by certain maintenance companies, square markings with triangular inner supports to indicate durable goods. The company. The same supply firm Daniel worked for. A slow alignment formed in Samuel's mind, not certainty, but a path shaped by details that once lived in the background. Daniel had access to crates matching the symbol. He made an extra stop near Cypress Road. Marielle noticed the symbol twice. The shed's corner bore the faint outline of something with that shape. Still, Victor's involvement remained plausible. He worked late nights, walked Cypress Road frequently, and sketched the symbol without explanation. And Helen, positioned at the center of the neighborhood, might have seen more than she admitted, offering Marielle assistance not from concern alone, but from a quiet awareness of someone else's movement. None of them appeared openly conflicted, but each held something internal, something unspoken. As Samuel arranged the clues, he noticed a thread of emotional tension woven into them. Victor's guardedness, Helen's subtle offers of help, Daniel's questionable detour. Not anger, not clear conflict, but a steady undercurrent of unease, like three people carrying different versions of the same unread story. The inconsistencies weren't in their facts. They were in their quiet pauses. Something emotional lived between these details, a small tension, a connection no one had voiced. Samuel exhaled, sensing the story tightening. The truth was near, but it wouldn't arrive with force. It would surface quietly, in the smallest detail. The shed felt colder when Samuel returned the next morning, as if the night had held the investigation in a tight, quiet grip. Nothing moved except the thin dust drifting above the concrete floor. He set the lamp down again, letting its warm circle illuminate the three profiles he'd laid out the night before. Victor, Helen, Daniel, three names connected by symbols, proximity, and silence. Yet something felt incomplete. He studied each profile as though seeing it for the first time. Victor's withdrawn routine, his quiet nature, his late-night walks. Helen's subtle presence, her gentle but persistent offers to escort Marielle home. Daniel's unverified detour, his access to crates matching the symbol. All carried small, logical reasons to stay on the list. But none stood out as the figure in the photograph, not with certainty. Samuel turned to the envelope that had reopened the entire case. The photograph and the short note lay inside, both now worn at the corners from repeated handling. The handwriting on the note was angled, careful, steady, not rushed, not distressed, as if written by someone who had spent a lifetime staying unnoticed. Who sends a clue after 50 years? Who waits until age obscures risk? Who finally decides truth needs air? His eyes drifted to the back of the shed, to the faint marking again, the shallow groove, the quiet symbol, the reminder of something placed there long ago. He scanned the early investigation reports again. Everything felt familiar until a subtle pattern emerged. The person who had been present in nearly every moment of the case, yet was never treated as a suspect. Someone whose statement appeared first in the file. Someone who entered the shed before anyone else. Someone with access to the scene before the police. Someone whose routine placed him there daily, unnoticed because routine creates invisibility. Elias Ward, the groundskeeper who found Marielle. Samuel stared at the original statement, neat, detailed, precise. Too precise. Times marked to the minute. Observations structured cleanly. Memory unusually sharp for someone who claimed shock. And one detail returned to Samuel with quiet weight. Elias had heard something when approaching the shed. A soft sound. A small step. He dismissed it as a bird. But the new photograph captured someone leaving the shed just before he entered. A figure who moved away from the camera. A figure only a minute ahead of discovery. Why had Elias never mentioned seeing someone? Why had he dismissed the sound so calmly? Why had the early investigators trusted his account so completely? Because he was the one who reported the scene. Because he appeared helpful, consistent, steady. Because he seemed like someone with no connection to the victim. Samuel traced the timeline. Elias worked near Cypress Road for decades. He maintained equipment including crates supplied by the same company Daniel transported goods for. He worked alone, quiet, regular, nearly invisible in daily routines. His access to the shed was unquestioned. Samuel flipped to a later page in the archives and felt a small shift inside his chest. 20 years after the case, Elias had retired and moved away, no forwarding address. But one detail stood out. He donated several boxes of old tools to a local facility. Among the listed items was a set of storage crates described as square-marked wood containers, the same type leaving faint patterns on the shed floor. The symbol Marielle had scribbled twice may not have been directed at any of the three main suspects. She might have seen it near the shed while passing by, connecting it to someone who worked there daily. Elias. Samuel returned to the envelope, reading the note again. Look closer, you missed it. The handwriting was smooth, mature, controlled. Like the writing in Elias' statement. Samuel compared them side by side, holding them at a slight angle under the lamp. The slant matched. The width of the lettering matched. The curve of the lowercase letters matched. The envelope wasn't a confession. It was a memory resurfacing. A reminder written by someone carrying a truth too long. Not guilt spoken aloud, but a whisper left for history. Elias had been the least suspected because he blended into the earliest hours of that morning, his presence viewed as part of the landscape rather than part of the story. He had access to the shed, to storage crates, to the quiet corners where symbols lingered unnoticed. And he had been the first on the scene, not as a witness alone, but as someone ensuring the scene looked undisturbed. The blurred figure in the new photograph didn't run. It walked, calm, familiar with the ground underfoot. Elias hadn't vanished because he feared discovery. He faded because age eventually folds a person into the background. But something, memory, conscience, the slow passing of time, had urged him to send that envelope, to reopen what he once hoped would remain untouched. Not a confession of guilt in dramatic terms, just a nudge for the truth to breathe. A final attempt to correct a moment he lived with for half a century. The least suspected was never Daniel or Helen or Victor. It had been the first man who spoke. The first man on the scene. The first voice recorded. Routine had hidden him better than any alibi. Samuel stood in the shed, the cold air pressing close, understanding forming with quiet certainty. The twist wasn't dramatic or loud. It surfaced through logic, through the smallest details held in steady lines of ink. The truth had always sat in the opening pages. It just needed someone willing to read them again. 7 ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. Samuel gathered the documents with slow, deliberate care. The shed's silence seemed to hold its breath as he placed the photograph back inside the envelope, sealing it gently. Outside, the morning light filtered through bare branches, casting pale shapes across the dusty ground. Time felt suspended, neither past nor present, as though waiting for acknowledgement. He stood at the doorway, taking one final look at the place where the truth had remained folded into routine for 50 years. The faint outline on the floor, the distant scent of old timber, the quiet corners where shadows once settled, each piece belonged to a story that never sought attention. It simply waited for someone to see it. Cases rarely end with clarity. They conclude with a version of the truth shaped by what evidence allows, not always by what the heart understands. Elia's would never face questioning now. Age and distance had already closed that path. No arrest, no courtroom, no formal closure. Yet there was a sense of completion, not triumphant, not dramatic, but steady. A silent acknowledgement that the smallest details can alter the entire landscape of understanding. Marielle's final days had carried hints, a symbol seen twice, a quiet shift on Cypress Road, the subtle awareness of being near something that didn't belong to routine. She hadn't named it, but she felt it. Some truths linger like that, sensed, not spoken. As Samuel stepped outside, the cold air met him with a calm stillness. The investigation had answered its central question but left an echo, one that settled into the space between knowledge and emotion. Justice, in this case, was procedural, mechanical, bound by what could be proven and what could not, yet something human remained beneath those boundaries. Truth, he realized, is often present in the quietest places. It lives not in the loud confessions or dramatic revelations, but in the faint marks hidden in corners, the overlooked symbols, the pauses in someone's voice. It waits in the familiar faces everyone assumes harmless. It hides behind routine. The surface, clean, ordinary, predictable, rarely reflects the full story. As he walked back toward the road, Samuel felt the weight of the case settle into memory. Not a burden, but a reminder. The echo of a life once interrupted. The quiet resilience of time. Marielle's name would no longer rest in an unsolved column. Her story, though incomplete, had found shape. And the shed behind him stood no longer as a place of confusion, but as a marker of patient truth, one that took half a century to emerge. Some endings don't resolve emotion. Some endings simply reveal what was always there, waiting. Samuel paused near the gate, letting the cold breeze carry the dust of the moment behind him. The world continued as it always had, quiet sidewalks, steady traffic, distant voices. Nothing in the landscape changed, yet something internal felt different. Truth, he thought, is not always visible on the surface. It reveals itself only to those who return to look again.